So let me just give you a little bit of background on these two awesome entrepreneurs, Cindy Wu and Jonathan Kim. So both of them are serial entrepreneurs. So Cindy started a company called experiment.com, and now she's moved on to her next company called Jelly. Jonathan is also a serial entrepreneur. He started co-founded a company called AppFuse, and now he's working at Terraformation, helping combat climate change by planting trees. So they're both doing amazing work and, jumping in here to find other amazing local entrepreneurs to inspire you and to connect you so that you can be inspired on your journey. So that's it from me. I want to welcome Jonathan and Cindy to the stage with David.
Thank you. Cool. Well, it's really great to be here. Thank you for that lovely introduction. So I'm Jonathan, Cindy, and this is David.
Hi.
So let's jump into it. So David, you're from Hawaii. You and I got to know each other over the last
random coffees.
Or so. Yeah. I'd love, if you can give the audience a little bit about yourself growing up here in Hawaii. What was that like?
So first of all, before I start, I'm going to say that I feel like a bit of a fraud here. Being next to two serial entrepreneurs, I can't say I've started any company. So let me just start by saying this. I'm in all of anyone who can go from 0 to 1, right, for any company. But I'll give you my background and some of maybe my career choices and how I sort of maybe fell into supporting more entrepreneurial-like companies. So I grew up in Hawaii, grew up in Pearl City. Basically, my biggest dream though was to actually find the furthest place on the map to go to school. So I went over to school in the Northeast and in Boston.
Why did you want to go so far?
Yeah, well, I think it was a bit of wanderlust, sort of as a kid, I never really kind of traveled very much. And so this is a chance to kind of see the world. Saw snow for the first time. It's the first time there. And I thought I was going to sort of be a physicist, professor. And the funny thing is, over time, I realized I was reading more of my economics textbooks or Wall Street Journal more than I was reading like physics textbooks. And so it told me to go to New York City, knock on doors, and sort of learn about banking along the way. And spent a bunch of time in banking. And I won't tell my whole story right now. You can ask more questions, but found my way from banking over to technology side into Amazon for about 12 years, and then back into financial services in the form of Simple Finance, which was one of the OG financial apps. And I found it over 10 years ago when it was like branchless banking was this new thing. And then now over the last 6 months, I've been at Acorns as president of Acorns. And so, yeah, my career has taken lots of twists and turns along the way, and but a ton of that has helped me help, whether it was Simple Finance or Acorns now, kind of grow and scale.
Yeah. In preparation for this, everybody that I talked to, who I mentioned your name to, and they mentioned Simple, there are a lot of very passionate Simple customers out there.
I'm one of them. I joined Simple in 2013. I'm very sad that it's gone.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna have a lot of questions about that. Sure. Maybe some from the audience as well. I'd love to double click on, you and I actually shared similar stories about, Boston seeing snow, maybe overrated, and that's one of the reasons I think that brought both of us back here. What was something that was super memorable that defined your childhood growing up in Hawaii though?
Yeah, growing up in Hawaii was basically, I think, super memorable. So many things. One is, I felt like I was surrounded by incredibly smart, interesting people. And that has always told me to come back. It was always a North Star to come back. I love the culture of the people in Hawaii. Those are the things that brought me back, apart from family. Right?
Can you talk about your time at the library here?
Yeah, that's right. Just before this, we were talking about the fact that my mother was a professor at the University of Hawaii. So I kind of grew up in this university setting, actually, for most of my childhood. The Hamilton Library basement was my babysitter because all the children's books would be stored there. And so I basically spent all my summers there. I would read every book in the basement of Hamilton. And what I would do is they had microfiche centers there, and I would actually switch people's slippers while they were in the microfiche in the dark. And that was another game. So yeah, UH was my playground.
That's really cool. Sure. And now it's coming full circle. Now you get
to
the next generation of folks.
That's right.
And so talk to me a little bit about the journey. So you were already on UH campus. You spent a long time in Hawaii, and then there was something that sort of brought you to the mainland and you and I talked about some of the decisions that you made along the way that sort of shaped you, and this is, imagine, really one of them too.
Like certainly when I was graduating from high school here and actually going into college, graduating from college, I remember one thing my father had said. He said, "Look, he worked for the city county, and he said, hey, I think I found a job that you can apply for, at the city." And I think that was then where my heart kind of broke because, I knew what my parents wanted, right? Which was to come back home. And what I realized then is that I just couldn't think of the career path that I could build here, right? And sort of telling him no, that I wasn't, I think that was a heartbreaking moment for me. And so that has always been in my mind. But gosh, if I had kids and they grew up in Hawaii, which now they are in Hawaii, they're growing up in Hawaii, what kind of opportunities do I want to give them here? Okay. That's sort of one way I'd like to give back.
Yeah. Okay. And then you found your way through, I think, a number of different things. Ended up, most of your time was at Amazon. And
Yeah.
you and I talked a little bit about just a couple of days ago, some of the things that you learned there at Amazon and how that sort of brought things forward.
All right. So spent my early career in banking. So like traditional brick and mortar branch banking and credit card and direct mail. And I spent some time, in these big banks in the East Coast and West Coast. And one thing I realized was it was very hard to change the culture of these banks, right? So it's hard. There's a reason why the rise of these fintechs was these banks couldn't change the culture to think of customers first. And there's something I observed that was frustrating from the inside. And so when I was over in Seattle, I was working at Washington Mutual, I realized, I need to find a bigger whiteboard to put my own ideas into how to treat customers better. And that's when Amazon came knocking on my door and said, no one quite realizes it. This is in 2006, 2007, but we have the biggest whiteboard you can imagine. And I just thought, wow, why not try? I'm leaving the fastest growing bank and mortgage lending company. This is again 2006, 2007, going to a bookstore. Right? And my wife said, like, why would you want to go to a bookstore? And I said, I just have to try this. Like they're giving me kind of end-to-end ownership of something. They're letting me test and learn and try new things. And so against the advice of most people, I joined Amazon in 2007, and it kind of opened my eyes into what happens when a company aligns all its values and all its cultures with its business model, and how that alignment can be so powerful and almost unstoppable in a lot of ways. I was very lucky to kind of miss the whole mortgage crisis and the banking crisis, not because I was smart at all. But at Amazon, at 12 years at Amazon, my path was also very nonlinear. I spent the first 6 years over the payment side, and so I managed all our credit cards, Amazon credit cards, and all the payment methods we use. And I was this product manager, like throwing stuff over the wall to a 400-person engineering team to go faster, right? And at some point, they were like, "Uncle, I can't go any faster," and I didn't quite have the empathy as to why. And so one of the big turning points for me was raising my hand and saying, "Look, I'll start my career over again if I could learn how to manage some of these platform teams at scale." Right? And that's when AWS, 6 years into my career at Amazon, said, "Look, we'll come over here and we'll teach you everything from scratch." And so I got to learn at probably some of the best education, like by fire places in the world, right? On cloud computing and what does it take to be fast and perfect. So this idea, this trade-off, right, that we all often face, especially when you're at scale. How do you do that? But also, how do you take teams that were maybe in big cultural deficits? So I inherited a team that was, 30% attrition rate. Nobody wanted to work there. We had infinite headcount.
30% of the people every year were
would leaving, right? And because we couldn't build anything new, because we were tech debt and no one wanted to work there. So how do you take teams out from that kind of situation and actually grow? Right?
So wait, you inherited a team where 30% of people were quitting every single year.
Yeah, and by the way, it wasn't necessarily unusual at Amazon, but this was a particularly difficult team because it was a centralized team that was constraining, let's say, the growth of some core parts of AWS, right? So there's a lot of pressure on that team.
What I think is interesting there is that it sounds like through your career, you flew up the ranks at Amazon. You've had to inherit probably a number of different teams or a number of problems. And I'm curious what that taught you as you went on to Simple and you inherited another organization, now Acorns.
Yeah. And so what I loved about this turning around teams and sort of cultural change was, I really started to realize like the people are the same, the technology is the same. So what's the difference, right, between a good performing and good performing team? It's the culture and the ways of working and how we interact with people, the respect we have for people. And oftentimes it was this balance between high execution cultures and high empathy culture. Right? So bringing that into balance, I found was the secret, at least secret for me. And so when I got this call about, look, you can turn around teams, why don't you turn around a company, right? And so that was a chance to just join Simple. I joined Simple after it had been acquired by BBVA, the Spanish bank. And so really it was there I had the whiteboard again for business and culture. And so the 2.5 years I spent there was really about, since I understood the business model of banking, that wasn't so difficult, but it was really around how do you take the leadership principles maybe I learned at Amazon, some of the cultural, put them into a different container, right? So different kind of people, different kind of compensation. Does that still work, right? And it's like a company of about 200 plus people.
So everyone probably knows Amazon, well, at least like, things you can order on Amazon, the e-commerce side of it. I think maybe some portion of people know AWS or Amazon Web Services. Can you explain Simple?
Yeah, Simple. I mean, Simple was essentially a bank app with a debit card. I mean, at the most core basic parts of it. When it launched, again, I wasn't there at the launch, but it launched because it was so revolutionary in the way that it treated, it paid attention to design and the customer and the voice and its branding. Like that was so unique for banking at the time, which is so odd to say now, right? That's so commonplace, but they were really unique. They also had this thing called safe to spend. So this idea of creating goals and expenses and pockets of those expenses, and then whatever's really safe to spend. So make it very easy for you to understand, like, what money can I spend? So it's really made for people who don't have a lot of confidence, right, in their financial lives. And that was a population I totally had a strong feeling to help, right? There was me growing up. Didn't have a lot of financial information, so I kind of learned it on my own. A lot of our customers at that time, they just didn't have a lot of financial education. Right? So this is a chance that helped them budget for the first time. Yeah.
What do you remember? I mean, you're an avid Simple.
I love Simple. I still love Simple. I think about Simple every day, almost every day, not every day. I don't know. I remember in 2013, I joined Simple. It was really easy. I don't even know how. I just pressed some buttons and then money was in my account, and then all of a sudden all of my paychecks were going to my account, and then it became the only bank that I wanted to use. And you guys did one thing that I still do today. I don't have it with me, but you guys mail this blue rubber band wallet, and I use that for I've used it for the last decade, and I can't find the rubber band that's the right size anymore, but I still use a rubber band wallet. Wow.
We did send out a bunch of rubber band. We had leather wallets too. And so when I landed there as the CEO, we had I don't know if it's thousands, but we had thousands of leather wallets. I don't know where they are today. We had to close down Simple as part of it because our parent company got bought. Our parent bank got bought. But yeah, a lot of people. It was probably the most emotional shutdown, right, that I've ever been through, where customers were just pouring out their stories. And that again is speaks to the power of brand and culture. Right?
Yeah. I'd love to know. It sounds like everyone feels startups, the highs and the lows. I think that's kind of a thing that people say again and again. What would you say some of the really highs were at your time at Simple? What were some of the lows?
Yeah, what was really interesting was so during my time there, that's also when COVID hit, right? And basically everyone had to go remote. But Simple was a remote first company anyway beforehand. And actually that was my first kind of culture shock. Coming from Amazon where that ethos wasn't there. Everyone very much was at the office and in different remote offices. So the big learning for me, the big eye-opening was, wow, okay, you can create a hybrid, remote, and in-office culture, and you can find talent everywhere, around the world. That really opened my eyes, and I thought, wow, we have this great secret. At the time, I thought it was a great secret. It's remote culture, and we can make it. I would even visit some companies in Hawaii and give them advice and say, you're not constrained by necessarily the technical talent in Hawaii. That shouldn't be a constraint for you anymore. You can hire anywhere, you can be remote, but that mindset still wasn't there, that you could be remote first, right? Yeah. So when COVID hit and we were all remote, we never skipped a beat, right? That was the amazing thing, and where a lot of companies had to go through these machinations of how to figure out culture. If anything, the hardest thing to figure out was we had in-person call centers, right? And those people, luckily, we gave them laptops and they all worked at home. And by the way, all those fears about working at home, just never materialized. So it was phenomenal to see how that company could work so well under that environment. Another, high-low moment during the summer where there were a lot of Black Lives Matter protests in Portland. It affected our people a lot, right? And so we basically took a lot of time and care and effort to accommodate, people needing to take time off to protest, for example, right? And what do you do if you get arrested in protest? Like there's a lot of these things that you just don't think about until you're there. And so I'm proud of the way that we responded as a company. And that was a very super emotional moment for us.
That's gotta be a tough stance to take too, as a financial company owned by a bank.
For sure. And we were in the heart of Portland, where it's sort of the heart of some of these protests. Yeah.
What was maybe the toughest day that you had?
Just across my career, or in
I mean, I'm sure Amazon probably had quite a bit, but you also had a lot of other resourcing. I feel like Simple was the first time that everything kind of was on.
Yeah,
your
everything
shoulders.
was on my shoulders. For sure, there were times where you'd wake up in the morning, you wouldn't quite know how to respond, but you do have to, right? So you have to kind of be there in front, and it took a bit of getting used to. I'll tell you, there was very tough times. Again, during a lot of the protests that were happening back then, there was a lot of call out by our customers to say, hey, what are you doing, Simple? Whether it's DEI kind of activities or reducing racial equality in the country. And so it was hard so one is we're a small company, right? We don't have a ton of resources. So, people were pledging, $10 million to, this place and that place. And what I realized, and we were still working to get to profitability, et cetera. So we had to be super responsible around that. So we couldn't do those things that were very showy and flashy. So instead what I did is I turned inside to our employees and asked them, what do we want to do, right? And how do we want to act? That's not for anybody externally, but really for us, and it has to be true to us. And that resonated the most. But it can be quite scary when the world outside is pressuring you to do something, right?
Yeah.
That may not be the right thing for you. Right?
Well, and it sounds like it probably was only tougher because people were depending on you so much because the brand and the culture was so strong in the organization that who would they turn to other than the people that have been helping them with their savings goals and other parts of their lives?
Absolutely, and I think this movement or this sort of progress of people wanting to express their values with their money, it's a one-way door. That's just going to keep going, right? So it's really, to me, an extension of like everything we do. Like, so now we want to eat local, right? We want to protect our local environments, right? But banking local, in some ways, this idea of putting your money where your values are and knowing how your money is being used, even throughout the financial system, I think that is a forever desire that's going to continue. Right? You're seeing kind of like in cryptocurrency with people wanting to express their values with money. Right?
Yeah, I'd love to. We'll put a pin on that one for the end. I'd love to talk about how you sort of see the things that are unique to Hawaii, or kind of bring some of those things out. But through the ups and downs, through some of these hard times, you've been carrying a lot on your shoulders, or sort of like had a lot of responsibility. And Cindy and I have been talking about, when does somebody know that they want to be at the helm of a company, whether they want to start one themselves and then eventually get to the point where they've got that kind of responsibility over a team. When was that moment for you?
Yeah, I don't think I ever actually had a moment where I said, hey, my goal is to run a company. Sometimes this is very related to a question I often get. I've mentored a ton of people in their careers about someone saying, hey, I'd like to manage a team. Right? So manage a company or manage a team, manage a company, these are just different layers of this idea of, hey, I want to be in control now. And my advice for them has been, even for myself, was, as I've gone on my career, I never really tried to focus on like, I want to be the manager of a team, as much as I focus on, do I have a vision for something, right? Can I execute on it? If I can, I'll execute an individual contributor until I can't, right? And then once I can't scale, then either someone will give me more research or I request for research and we keep going. So to me, that's no different. When you are running a company, you have to have the same components. You have the same ability of like, do I have a vision for this company, for this entity or this organization, and how I want to take it? Do I have the sort of tools and ability to execute on that? That's how I used, that was my litmus test, right, to see whether I was ready for that role. I do think, though, that can be different for maybe a founder, and again, for founding a company that you're going from 0 to 1, right? Where it takes quite a lot of courage, and you may not know the path even, right? So you may just have the idea, but not even know how to get there.
Really?
Yeah. So so maybe what I'm talking about is maybe some taking something that's more mature, right? Yeah.
You're exposing the truth that we have no idea what we're doing. We're just making it up all the time.
I saw that from Cindy. I saw that from Cindy's interview.
Yeah, no, everybody's just making it up.
That's right,
We're just doing
that's
the
right.
best we can.
That's right.
What were some of the things that, maybe there's a distinction, or it sounds like you're calling out a distinction between that early stage of 0 to 1, and then people talk about the 1 to 10, and then maybe the 10 to 100. What do you see as the key differences between them, and how do people decide where they want to allocate their time there?
Yeah, I do think there's a bunch of, like, there's a multi-dimensional grid, right? So some of these things are like your ability to take personal risk, right? And how much where are you in that stage in your life? Ironically for me, maybe as I get older, I will take more risks. And so but this maybe I'll go back down to the 0 company. But I think there's your personal factors, but there's also, sort of what drives you and what motivates you. I think there's very different kinds of motivations going 0 to 1 versus the scaling type of leader. I'll tell you the other thing I've seen, talking to a lot of companies who are in that scaling phase, so call it 100 to 200 to 300 people, is really paying attention to culture and the ways of working. What are your values as a company? Because what I tend to see is that if you haven't paid attention to that early on, you just sort of find yourself in a place and find yourself in a culture, right? Maybe not intentionally. And many times that can be good or bad. You won't quite know, but it can be random. Otherwise, I've seen people who have been very careful to curate that culture very early on. And I guess my lessons that I've seen is like be very intentional about what kind of culture you want to create. Each additional person you bring on, makes it that much harder to change if you actually create a culture. I think in a remote first environment as well, this idea of in the in-office, right, you could know everybody, and maybe that could scale to 50 people. Maybe that could scale more. And once you go to different floors, maybe that even changes. But in a remote first environment, that number where you kind of know everybody is actually much smaller, right? So even at 50 people in a remote first environment, it's very difficult to see people bump into randomly. So that being very intentional about how you vibe and view people with your values, I think more important, because they're going to be making decisions on their own. Right? And,
and somebody who's inherited, depending on how you count, at least 2, if not more, teams or organizations. What's something that people like Cindy and I should know in starting a company that is just like, are going to become major problems or major tailwinds in the future?
I don't know if there's any like template, but I think there's this idea of authenticity, right? And you can really tell when something's authentic and not.
What's an example that you've seen of like an authentic or inauthentic?
One of the big aha moments for me coming to Amazon was it's leadership principles. And I come from banks on the East Coast, West Coast, and everyone had their thing on the wall, right, that they put down, and here's our values. I had never seen a company, and this truly is the power of Amazon, is they take their leadership principles so seriously that it's used in decision making. So in a meeting where you might debate some choice, right? Someone might say in the meeting, and not ironically, not in a strange way, but does this really fit our value to think big? Is this big enough, right? And it's when you can use values, I think, in everyday conversation, that makes it very authentic. I don't pretend to know, I don't even remember the list of the 10 or 12 values, but I do have my top 3 or 4, right? And I use those all the time. And that was one striking example. It's a unique example of where a company can use it in its everyday decisions. That is really something you just don't see very much.
What were the top 3? It sounds like, I imagine you brought them with you.
I mean, yeah, like by the way, the first one I love is, and then actually it's no longer an Amazon leadership principle. It was when I first joined, it was to be vocally self-critical. And that one principle, to me, was responsible for breaking down lots of politics. Right? So again, coming from a banking background, it's infinite sort of politics and people kind of trying to win, right? Win their point of view, etc. I think that one principle changed my life probably. So if we can all be vocally self-critical, it means that we call out our own faults, right? So if you have to call out my faults, then I'm not good at vocally self-critical.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So if I present an idea, actually one of the first things I should do is tell you why this idea is not good. Like, so, and I think that concept, just that little concept, if you can really apply it consistently, earns lots of trust.
Yeah.
Right?
Why do you think it got taken off the list?
Because actually it was subsumed under a value called earn trust. So there was a value called vocally self-critical and earn trust, and I believe it got subsumed underneath there. But so if you double click on earn trust, it'll be vocally self-critical. I just loved it as a top level, and coming from cultures that were very politics involved. And I would encourage any founder leader to incorporate that one principle, right? Vocally self-critical, because if we can all be that way, I think it reduces the need to win, right? And if you're, it reduces the need to sort of be better than the other person, because what you're not doing is trying to find truth, right? Truth seeking.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the other piece I would kind of think about is create a culture that we're seeking truth, not seeking to win.
Yeah. And back to your point earlier about authenticity, I think one of the things that we've seen as a trend when people do start setting out these cultural values is using unique language that is authentic to them. Vocally self-critical could have been rewarded as, I don't know, respect,
something else,
perseverance, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
I like how they did that.
Yeah, and the key to me is like, if you're going to use different words, just make sure you define those words. Pretty clearly.
Yeah, it's cool.
There's one more that if I neglect to say this, I'd be like so disappointed. The writing culture, right? So they said really to use. Amazon was very famous for trying to remove slides, getting rid of slides, PowerPoint slides from meetings, and just going through narratives. And so an hour-long meeting would basically start with 30 minutes of reading in silence, like 6 pages, and then there's no presenter, right? And someone just starts asking questions. And that I've taken with me from company to company to company where I've gone. And each time, people at first hesitant, and then afterwards, they come to me and said, it's very difficult for me to now go back to PowerPoints because
So you do this at Acorn now. You just,
absolutely. We've added it again. I don't, even for culture change, I don't like to kind of decree anything. So what I tell people is test and learn, right? Test with me, learn with me. If you like it, keep it. If you don't like it, don't use it. And you're starting to see the snowball effect. People starting to say, let's put this into a narrative. Let's read silently for 30 minutes and talk and ask questions. It gets rid of the variable, the presenter, and it allows for asynchronous decision making, right? So if you have the presenter providing context for these slides, like you have to be in the room. And so all of a sudden you create this bottleneck on your calendar, right? So how do you scale? How do you be asynchronous? The narrative culture is one way to do that.
oh, I like that. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it can be super powerful if you do that.
We had an experience where we did that, like towards the end of experiment when we still had staff, and I really enjoyed that because then no one ever has to present, and then you're
That's right.
discussing the content that everyone
That's right. That's
knows.
right. And then the other secret piece is read together in the meeting. So if you distribute a document, right, how many of you actually read before the meeting? Like maybe 50%?
Yeah.
That means 50% of you can't join the discussion. Right? So by creating the study hall, like a library time,
Yeah.
everyone's on the same page, right? And then you start asking on the same page.
I see all the educators probably being like, good, this is
Yeah.
how I get people to not, or to do their homework. We'll just do it in class
That's right.
and they'll never leave.
That's right. That's right. Some people still think like I'm talking them when I say like we're going to be silent.
Yeah, they're gonna feel like they're in trouble.
That's right.
Can you talk more about finding the truth and like,
Yeah.
I have a specific question about the truth that I've been thinking about for the last 2 weeks. My question is like, is the truth opinionated? Is the truth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of this comes from like the fact that I was going to be a physics professor one day, right? And I thought that was my life, and the search for that was often the search for like fundamental truths, right, in the physical world. And sort of when you get to the business world, you realize, well, everything's relative, right? Like whose marketing campaign is the best? Well, like what's the truth there, right? So I don't think it's as concrete as I I know the algorithm for the truth, but I think it's a search, right? It's a search, and it's an attitude of we're going to do our best to find the truth. And some of these things are unknowable, right? Whether you're trying to make a brand decision and you have a discussion about these things, but you can start to do a hierarchy of truths. So I think one way is to just use data, right? So data-based decisions, maybe we get closer to that area. You can look at people who've solved or experienced these kinds of problems before, this pattern of problem before, so maybe they have higher judgment, right? In terms of trying to figure out what to do next. And then ultimately, you might just have people with just higher judgment. So sometimes when I look at how do you make decisions or how do you find truth in some of these areas, you look at a hierarchy of what potentially gets you there closer. But I think the other piece is whenever that I present something, I don't ever present something thinking that I have the truth either, right? So well, if anything, try to knock down my idea, right? Perhaps we get to a better one, and maybe we get closer to truth.
Without getting closer to, it's like an impossible
Yeah.
mission that you're always trying to
I think
get.
some
get
decisions
there.
are very clear cut, right? When you do an A/B test and something performs better than the other. But I think there are a lot of times where it's great. But if we all have this attitude of we're trying to find truth, not trying to win, then I think you get closer. You have a better chance of being closer.
This is kind of interesting how you're applying something that is cross-disciplinary from you're bringing some of your math and physics background into the decision making that you make as a leader. Tell me more about that, like other ways that you sort of see that play out.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things that I saw was you study in business. If you go to business school, you certainly learn about the Toyota manufacturing process, right? So this idea, this idea of like fast and perfect, right? They can make cars at scale. When they first came out with their manufacturing process and perfect cars, right? Unheard of. A lot of that discipline has been brought to software, right? Software engineering.
Yeah.
Right? So agile
methodologies, yeah.
all these methodologies brought into play. You can think of it also, but a lot of people haven't applied that necessarily to the non-engineering side, but it's the business side. So how do you make a decision? Let's say in a bigger company, maybe a smaller company, it's much easier to make a decision. A bigger company, the decision-making process can be just as long as the execution process of, let's say, the building the technology, right? And what we don't look at is, if you have a tenant that says, like we're trying to make decisions distributed, right, to the people closest to the work. Well, then if someone else far away from the work has to make a decision, treat that as an error, right? So someone gave me this framework before, and I thought, oh, it was fantastic. It's an error in the decision-making process or the manufacturing process of the decision. And
If the person closest to it
is not able to make the decision, then you have to then stop the line. Like, yes, you can make a decision to help the line move, but stop it and ask, why doesn't that person have the ability to make the decision? Do they not have the data, right? Do not have the authority to do it? Maybe they don't have the judgment or experience. Maybe I don't trust this person. Like, be very explicit with yourself about why this is happening. And you keep doing this and you keep asking the question. It starts to change the hygiene and the conversation of the organization, right? And I love applying those concepts, maybe to the non-manufacturing setting, right?
Yeah. And I think it's encouraging to people who think that there's a really linear path to become a CEO of a company or an entrepreneur or something like that. And it sounds like what you're saying is no, it's not linear. In fact, some of these detours, these other ways that you go can really help accelerate how effective it can be in the later stages.
Absolutely. Like I love the fact that I started off in banking, I went to technology and cloud computing, and stint in advertising, and came back right to financial services. I think it's just made my set of experiences that I can relate to people just much richer, right? And the use cases and examples I could bring. So a lot of it is pattern matching. Right? A lot of problems you've seen.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, and changing gears a little bit and talking about coming back. So you're back in Hawaii now, and so you're running Acorns from Hawaii.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm the president of Acorns for the last 6 months, and I had moved back to Hawaii when I was still the CEO of Simple. So I was still the CEO of Simple.
I didn't know that.
So, right, so yeah, I felt like remote first. There's no reason why we can't be able to distribute it. But when we were shut down and I was on the beach, literally on the beach for a while, someone had introduced myself to as the CEO of Acorns to Noah, and we thought, wow, there could be something really interesting we could do together. But part of my requirement was to stay in Hawaii. Acorns is a remote first company, and we've got people distributed all across the United States, and this is not unusual. Right?
So that was a non-issue.
It was not an issue. No.
That's awesome.
For me, it's been fantastic. I wake up early in the morning anyway, so this is the first time. And I was telling you before this, like the first time in my career that I could actually pick up my kids, from school, and after school I just never could do before because I would always work late, etc. And so it's been truly a blessing actually to work from Hawaii, and I'd love to build teams here. Well, ultimately as well. So that's everything.
Are you hiring here?
We are hiring. I think we just hired our second employee from Hawaii in our marketing team.
Nice.
So we welcomed her aboard about a month ago. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, you and I have talked a little bit about your vision for Hawaii. You've got kids. How many kids do you have now?
I've got two boys. They're freshmen and seventh grade.
Okay.
Yeah.
You had said to me that you got a vision for the Hawaii that you sort of see for them. Some of the opportunities that you didn't see for yourself growing up that you want to see for them in the future. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I will say since I left Hawaii, I mean, so much has changed, and there's so many great things like PACE and both of you here, and like the infrastructure and the opportunities are just like so different and so much better, and so to me, like very, very encouraging. And but there are many things I still think we can do here, right? I mean, certainly I think COVID has in some strange way helped us to realize, remote work is possible. So people who want to come back can come back, right? There's nothing actually that is really going to stop anyone from doing it. People want to stay, can stay and still work for mainland companies as well. Ultimately, loved for Hawaii to create its own companies, right? Its own Hawaii-based companies. And I think that's just a matter of time and concentration of talent here. But I think remote work is now going to make that concentration much more probable than it ever was in the past. I do think we can leverage a lot of Hawaii's ecosystem. So take its disadvantages, right? We're a small, like I think the most distant island. I don't know what the stat is, right, in the world, and surrounded by water. But think of it as now a campus environment. So now we've got a constrained environment, physical environment. Well, what can you do to constrain? Think of it like a campus. And could you actually innovate on campus environment? I think you can, right? And I think there's a bunch of things we could do because we're constrained and be a really innovation lab, I think, for the rest of the world. And those are some of those things I'd love to really actualize or help people actualize.
Yeah, we were just talking about this at Terraformation, and on the Big Island, there's I think like 11 of 13 of the world's climates all exist on the Big Island of Hawaii, and that's a really unique opportunity for some people to do ecological work, and we're trying to do some of that as well. I'd love to hear your take. What are some of the things that you think are unique to Hawaii that future entrepreneurs should be leaning into?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I think Hawaii is a destination. So I think I already covered a little bit about this, but sure, Hawaii is a preferred place, a destination for people. I think is a no-brainer thing to keep pushing on, right? Some of the movers and shakas and some of those programs with big people here. I think we should do more and more of those things. In terms of the other piece, apart from the ocean and sort of its natural sort of resources, I think there's a bunch of set in a few of these pitch competitions, right? And many of them are based on our natural ecological resources. But I do think that the fact that you have sort of smaller communities or pillars of communities that can make things happen. So this is less about what specific material resources we have, but I think we have this ability to kind of move things across the island, just based on a handful of people, right? So just in the few months I've been here, just getting to meet different leaders, you can kind of meet a lot of them, and I think you can motivate and drive projects kind of in a unique way that you couldn't do in another bigger.
Yeah, it does feel like access to people here is a lot easier than.
That's right, and everyone's doors are very much open. Everyone is willing to talk to me, for example, and I open my doors to everyone else. So I think there's that spirit, right, that we have here that is, I think, unique.
Yeah, everyone feels like they're a neighbor.
Yeah,
we've reached the 45 mark, so I just wanted to let the audience know if you have questions to please put them in the chat. And then we can continue until the questions show up, and I'll keep an eye on the questions.
Yeah, maybe a spicy topic, but one of the things that Cindy and I talked about is how do you make something unique in Hawaii that is sustainable, right? I think people have talked about tourism maybe not being sustainable.
Sure.
Other dependencies, natural resources,
Yeah.
our use of that not being sustainable.
Well, I mean, one of the easy kind of no-brainer answers tends to be like digital businesses that can scale globally, like it's not resource intensive, right? And can scale, right? And I think there's no reason why these things can't be launched globally. But even thinking about tourism, I think there's a lot of times that we think about tourism maybe in a certain kind of box. So tourism is about, certain people visiting this specific part of the island. We're more and more thinking about tourism infrastructure now, whether it's apps or other kinds of digital experiences. Why not establish that and export that now as a tourist-based kind of industry, right, to other campus-like environments, if you want to call it that. But I think certainly the digital products can scale infinitely. So it's like, to me, it's a no-brainer. But to keep sustainable business, to build sustainable business here. But you could take a lot of those products to kind of maintain the physical sustainability of the life, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I think alongside that too, leveling up the jobs with more skilled labor
For sure.
or like high-tech jobs, bring that more centralized and like could help.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, but the other side of it is like, is you do bring high-tech jobs, just be very aware of the gentrification, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And the sort of inequities that could produce, right? So in a city like you grew up in Seattle or near Seattle, and you sort of seen what happens, right? When a company like Amazon
takes
over,
an
right?
entire
And then
part
all
of
of
the
a sudden
city.
you have a lot of disenfranchised people as well. And so I think it's very important to like keep that hyper conscious and top of mind.
We have two questions from the audience. The first one is, David, can you repeat the two values that you were speaking about?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, the top one for me has always been vocally self-critical. So this idea of, always calling out your own flaws, because we're not perfect. And this idea of not necessarily trying to win, but to find truth. I don't think that's an Amazon value, but it's certainly a value that I hold near and dear to my heart. So those are probably the two that I probably take with me everywhere I go.
Or start a petition to get them back on the Amazon values list.
Second question, I'll just read it directly since it's kind of long. Being from Hawaii, where core values such as family and community are held so highly, what were some culture shocks or lessons you faced, whether it be in conducting business or personal relationships?
Yeah, look, I spent the early part of my career on the East Coast, and it was in New York, Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, and I don't know if I would say it's opposite, but it's like you could say it's almost opposite of Hawaii and Hawaii culture. There were shocks, like certainly how blunt and how maybe open and how condescending someone can be in the open. The combination of those two things. Certainly those are shocks initially, but you get a tough spin and and you learn to move on. And so, but I've often, because of those experiences, I think it's kind of allowed me to maneuver in environments without much fear. So maybe by going through the experiences, you get this sort of fearlessness, right? Whether it's an Iron Man suit of armor or something, but it makes you very powerful.
Yeah. That's interesting. One of the things coming back was that I noticed is that in Boston and New York, people are so quick to honk at you. Whereas here in Hawaii, there's one street going up Waiho over California Avenue, and I sat there, light turned, from red to green, back to red again, a line of like 6 cars, nobody honked. Nobody honked. And then the light turned green again, and the lady.
Let me be vocally self-critical. I actually honked at one person today, so I was like, oh.
Is it like a reflex?
Yeah,
you're
I
recovering.
gotta stop.
Cool. What other questions here? Oh,
We have a question from the audience.
live audience question.
You have to repeat it.
I'll repeat it.
Biggest career regret.
What is your biggest career regret?
Ooh, biggest career regret. So interesting. It's hard for me to think about it as regret because each time, even when it was terrible, I learned so much. And maybe that's another personality trait of mine where I'm the forever optimist. So I kind of take everything as a learning opportunity. But maybe maybe there's one thing. My life might have changed if I had majored in economics instead of physics, and been maybe it might be an economics professor right now, and some of your behavior economics. Because at the end of the day, that's sort of one of the reasons why I left physics was I was really interested in how people make decisions, right? So this idea of how do you make choices in your life, and I was always interested in consumer choices, and that's why I was always in retail banking. I went to corporate banking, investment banking, and maybe even today, if I was still on the beach and not working with Acorns, I probably would be at the University of Hawaii trying to get my PhD in economics. So maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Yeah.
We have another question from the audience. What are your thoughts about Hawaii diversifying our economy and the best opportunities for us to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly feels like like it's a no regrets move. I don't think it's hard to argue against diversifying our economy. I think COVID just exposed how fragile we are, right, to having just tourism. And in terms of the best opportunities, I still fundamentally believe technology as an industry is one of the best things we can do. Hawaii, by the way, has a very strong financial system, right? And so that again, from an ecological standpoint, not something that's terribly destructive. I think technology has a lot of great benefits and can be implemented in a way that helps our ecosystem. I don't know if I have a strong opinion on like specific industries though. Right?
Can you speak a little bit to why he doesn't have like Bank of America and Chase and all these things?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna don't quote me on this, but I believe there is a regulation around that, but I'm not quite sure what exactly.
So some kind of law.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
anti-competitive laws.
No, so that's why I'm saying I'm really speaking outside of my area of expertise, but I believe that is one of those reasons. Not to say that they haven't tried. I think there were some acquisitions that were done in the past, but this is before my time.
So if like coming back to like technology being one of the things that Hawaii can use to diversify the economy, why do you think that hasn't happened yet?
Yeah, to be honest, like, in some ways, I'm still very much an outsider here. Like I came back. I grew up here, and I came back about a year and a half ago. So I'm still kind of peeling the onion in a lot of ways about the ways that I could best help. And so I don't know if I don't have a great answer to that in terms of what has held us back. But I am very optimistic about just talking to everybody that I've been talking to, and how energized everyone is. I feel like that's really the power.
Where do you think your optimism comes from?
Maybe I was built this way.
Like it's in your genes.
Yeah, maybe it is. But I also believe it's just the power of like human inventiveness. Like at the end of the day, I believe we can innovate away out of almost anything. We just have to activate it. Right? And I'm super encouraged by folks like you here. And if I wasn't at Acorns, I would be hard at work, probably joining one of your companies. So super excited. Yeah.
Cool. What's if you could say something, you're a physics guy, so time travel is probably off the table for you, but you could say something to your 20-year-old or so self, what advice would you give them?
Oh, buy lots of Apple and Amazon stock. Like that's an easy one. just like borrow and just buy and just close your eyes for about 10 years, 20 years. Yeah.
What about like more career? Or I guess at that point,
like your career is done. Your career is done, right? No.
After they did that,
I would
what
say,
they do in the meantime while they wait for the.
I would say, I think I had a lot of angst about like the fact that I had no idea what I wanted to do in my career. So I very much didn't have a linear path or anything, and I would just tell myself that person like go where your curiosity wants you to go, and don't worry about the fact that you're taking so many twists and turns in your career, because at the end of the day, it's really about how curious you are and how that kind of helps you grow and stretches you. Do the thing you fear the most is another one probably. So do what you fear was a little tagline I used to put up in my dorm room in college, and that's often been a great guiding principle for me too. Right.
We have one more question.
Yeah.
How did you learn to tell good advice from bad advice?
So how did you learn to tell good advice from bad advice?
Think about that hierarchy of searching for truth. So, if the good, do you have any data that to give based on your advice? Do you have have you experienced that issue before? Have you seen it work out for you before? Do you have high judgment? And if you don't, then I'll probably put it in the I don't know section of it. But there's also how well do you know me as a person, and so much advice is so personal. And, so same advice, different people, very different results.
Yeah. Maybe we can do one more question and then close out.
Okay.
Maybe the one from Crystal.
What advice do you have for student entrepreneurs in Hawaii?
Oh, it's in many ways, it's what I also tell my kids. It's make sure you're always thinking every day about building something, right? That could be building pixels or changing some physical thing in the world. Ultimately, it won't. I don't necessarily think it matters exactly what you build, right? But go ahead and act, right? It's see, so many people just sort of talk about acting versus actually just doing, and I think that really separates people a lot. So my basic courage is go and build something small or act on that idea in a small way. Don't wait for some big all the stars align, because they rarely do.
I think we got some really great gems out of David today. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thanks, I'm the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
So,